Welcome back. Now is the big moment we have all been waiting for. This is what it must have felt like when the Beatles were releasing their Sgt. Pepper album band as a fan. Right now we're going to share the BigMedilytics blueprint, and joining us on stage is Professor Antoinette de Bont, Tilburg University and Erasmus University, Rotterdam, Dr. Roland Roller, German Research Center for Artificial Intelligence, and Professor Ricard Martinez, University of Valencia. And welcome back, Supriyo. I know this is your session. I will be back for the Q&A. So the floor is yours and the world is watching.
Thank you very much, Gord. Around 5 years ago, when the BigMedilytics consortium came together to draft the proposal, we asked ourselves, what could we do to make sure we leave behind a memorable and impactful legacy when the project is over? One thing was certain, given the uniqueness and broad scope of the BigMedilytics project. It was clear that the lessons learned during the project had to be captured so that others could benefit from them long after the project ended. And this is what led us to the creation of the BigMedilytics blueprint. As I mentioned earlier, the BigMedilytics project covers a broad range of use cases ranging from population health to oncology and operational excellence in hospitals. What makes it even more exciting is that the focus isn't just on the latest and greatest innovative technologies. Instead, the project focuses on a whole spectrum of factors that play a critical role in deciding whether a particular concept can actually scale across hospitals in Europe. For example, apart from the obvious technology perspective, we looked at things from the perspective of healthcare policy, business models, and legal, privacy, and ethical aspects. The BigMedilytics blueprint captures all those learnings so that others in the field can learn from our experiences and help speed up the uptake of big data solutions in the healthcare sector across Europe. Over the next hour, I'll be having a discussion with 3 experts who have contributed extensively to the blueprint. First, we have Dr. Roland Roller from the German Institute for Artificial Intelligence, who led the work on the blueprint. Dr. Roland Roller works as a project manager and researcher in the Speech and Language Technology Group at the German Research Center for Artificial Intelligence, or DFKI. Roland studied computer science and computer linguistics at the University of Trier and Saarland University, did his PhD at the University of Sheffield on information extraction from biomedical literature, and had a research visit at the University of Basque Country in San Sebastian and at NTT in Kyoto. Currently, he's working on topics related to multilingual text processing and clinical decision support. Next on the panel, we have Professor Antoinette de Bont. She is the Dean at Tilburg School of Social Behavioral Sciences. Her research focuses on digital healthcare, in particular on the contribution of the social sciences to digital sciences. Together with healthcare providers, policymakers, engineers, and businesses, she analyzes the development of digital technologies in European healthcare. She's a graduate of health sciences at Maastricht University, where she majored in governance studies and technology studies. Last but not least, we have Professor Ricard Martinez from the University of Valencia. Professor Martinez lectures in the Department of Constitutional Law, Political Science and Administration, and is a director of the Chair of Privacy and Digital Transformation. He has devoted his research to the study of fundamental right to data protection and to different issues related to the impact of information and communication technologies on privacy. He's also the member of the panel of experts in data and artificial intelligence of the Department of Innovation and Universities of the Generalitat Valencia. He's also a member of the group of experts for drafting of a Charter of Digital Rights of the Secretary of State for Digital and Artificial Intelligence of the Spanish Ministry of Economic Affairs and Digital Transformation. His research on the development of controlled open data environments for health research applied by Fundación 29 to the development of the Playbook Health Data 29 project was awarded the Good Practices Award of the Spanish Data Protection Agency in January this year. Thank you all for being with us here today. Well, let me start with you, Roland. Could you please tell us a bit about what the blueprint is about, you know, the thought process behind it, and how others could benefit from this blueprint in the healthcare sector?
Yeah, thank you very much. Yeah, I mean, you gave already a short introduction, but I will show some slides as well. So, as you mentioned and pointed out, the BigMedilytics project was quite large. For the last 3.5 years, we were working on the topic with 12 different pilots covering 3 different themes. We had more than 30 partners, so it was really huge, and we wanted to have a big outcome here. So the main goal was to share our experience and our learning so that other people can benefit from it. And so the BigMedilytics blueprint aims at kind of being a guide in order to roll out big data and machine learning projects in healthcare, to give guidance here. And we take different perspectives into account, something like the technical perspective, which is obvious as I have a technical background, but also the business aspect and ethical, legal aspects as well. So, yeah, we follow actually a kind of a bottom-up approach. We started from a very low perspective, so we monitored all the different developments of the pilots. We started from the beginning, having interviews with the pilots, trying to monitor what they're doing, what are the aims, how do they address it, what are the challenges here. So we did this over the whole period of the project, and kind of this process ended probably about spring, when every partner kind of delivered a very detailed document about what they exactly did, how did they solve it, including their experience, their lessons learned. So this is kind of a very important output of each single pilot. But then we went to a different perspective. So we switched from a very detailed perspective to a kind of transversal, to a horizontal view. So now that we have all this input, we can actually analyze certain aspects of the pilots across pilots. So we can say, what about system architecture? And we can analyze the different approaches, or we can analyze solutions like image processing across the pilots in the transversal view. Then the general learnings. So this is kind of, in our opinion, the main outcome of the project. So each project provided already general learnings and challenges, but then we sat together, like we were sitting together, but we were sitting together with single pilots. We had smaller kind of, how do we say, smaller groups to work together, and we had workshops in order to kind of get the general learnings, which are not only valid for one pilot, but which kind of scales up in order to, so that we can apply this for future projects. So yeah, the general learnings cover a lot of different topics. Probably we will discuss about this later in our discussion. But then we wanted to go a step further. So we tried to identify different stakeholders of the health continuum. So in order to set up a big data project in healthcare, what are the relevant stakeholders? Like the data scientists might be obvious, but also the clinical staff, the hospital decision makers. So we kind of defined the relevant stakeholders, and we try to map our learnings to these stakeholders. We try to map relevant technologies which have been developed to these stakeholders. So in this perspective, you can go into it if you're a certain stakeholder, if you're a patient, you can see what are the relevant outcomes of the project for you. And then finally, we try to go a step beyond. So the overall goal is to provide kind of a guidance in order to set up a new project. And so now we try to come up from a patient perspective, like we came up with a fictitious patient journey. So a patient is suffering a certain health condition, and he's going through different stages, like going to the general practitioner, going to the hospital and so on, being at home with this and living with this with a health condition. So, and we try to map our solutions of the project and our learnings to this fictitious patient journey in order to kind of improve the situation. So maybe this is a bit too abstract. Let's see. So actually today we published our website. So the website is already online, but we published the blueprint. So we collected a lot of information. It's a lot of text to read through, but in order to to access this information in an appropriate manner, we present all this information in an interactive way on an interactive website. So you've seen the bubbles before. You see also those bubbles on our website. So please have a look, bigmedilytics.eu/blueprint. So there's where you can find our learning. So you can browse through the data and you can explore the different findings here. And then maybe if this is not blueprintish enough, one last thing on the top. So, so if you really need a guidance in order to set up your project, in order to set up your big data project in healthcare, this is another guidance from our side. So it's based on CRISP-DM, on the cross-industry standard process for data mining. So it's a standard in industry in order to set up machine learning projects and data mining projects. So this is kind of a circular movement. It's split into 6 different phases, starting with business management, where you kind of define your goals, you define your KPIs, you need to know what you want to do. Then you move to the data understanding phase, where you kind of start collecting the data, what data is available, can these data help to solve my goals? And if not, you need to move back to the business understanding and you maybe need to do some amendments. Then you can move further to the data processing, and yeah, typically from a data science perspective, this is kind of the most time-consuming step. You need to take the data, process it, in order to kind of then train your model in the modeling period. So you train your model in order to achieve your goals. Then in the evaluation phase, you actually examine, could my goals be achieved? Did we reach the previously defined KPIs? If not, you need to go to the business understanding. And then, I mean, if everything is good, you go to the deployment. And this is a kind of circular movement. But I don't want to talk too long here. So, I mean, as this starts with business understanding, so we maybe start with you, Antoinette. So how did you develop actually the KPIs?
Thank you for your lovely presentation and the circular, because that would be my main answer. So what we did, we developed the key performance indicators from the start. And I think that was the key lessons we learned. So that business understanding, what goals can you reach, how can you make value of your project, needs to start from the beginning. And that takes as long as the technical development. So that was very important, starting from the start. So first workshop we discussed with the pilots and with the whole project, what are our key performance indicators. The other thing is that we included, as you already mentioned, all the stakeholders. That was really relevant. So the patients, the providers, the payers, the insurers or the government, and of course the hospitals or the healthcare organization. So that's key that we included them, and then you have measures about satisfaction for patients, satisfaction for professionals, you have of course the money, how it costs, and is it the value. That's the issue we did. But the most important lesson we learned, and that's a hard lesson, is that it's iterative. And that is a nice circle, but that means that you define the KPIs from the start, but halfway you had to redefine them. And that means that you cannot always compare from the beginning to the end. And that's a disadvantage. But the main advantage is that you discuss the KPIs, discuss how performance comes about. And I think the iterative session and the discussions we had, there we learned what the value is of healthcare technologies and big data technology and AI. So I think we discussed it in iteration, in discussions, in workshops. And that was the key lessons we learned.
And how did you define the impact of big data technologies?
Yeah, that's a good question. So KPIs are about outcomes. And impact to us is also about how these outcomes are reached. So how do you create the impact? So we did, you see the differences in the beginning and in the end, what we reached. But then we want to know, what was the role of the technology? What was the role of the payers? What was the role of the providers? So we used causal modeling. That's a method where you understand the patterns behind the KPIs and make the story what explains these KPIs. And the other thing, and that's also important, you already mentioned it, is that what the challenge of this project was is to keep the patient and the provider into our view. And what is big data for them? And one of the main lessons is, and that's what this project makes so interesting, is that with the technologies, we will change what information is about. We will change how decisions are made. and we will change how care is provided. So the KPIs also wants to measure this transformation rather than the outcomes. So 2 lessons: look about the causal models behind it, that's important, how, and look about the change that we realized in this project.
So Antoinette, I was thinking, the project is quite large, of course. We've mentioned this multiple times. There are 12 different pilots. They all have different ways of working. They work on different subjects. So in your opinion, what were the main learnings when you observed how these pilot teams work with each other?
There are many lessons to draw, and if I had to take out one lesson, because we want to highlight things, I think the main lessons we learned is that we need to work in teams. And that's what also these pilot teams were about. We had data scientists, professionals, and also managers from the hospitals or the healthcare organization in the team. What we had in the beginning, but we learned along the way, is that we also need in these teams the legal advisors, the ethical advisors. So, and what happened in the beginning is that these pilot teams went to the legal advisor, went to the ethics, and then they had to solve the issues on their own. What we learned, if they work in a team and they can together find the solutions. So that's one, and the other thing is, and that was very hard for this project, you need co-location. You need to be in the same location and discuss what is this data about, can I explain these outcomes, should I interpret these rules. So these are the things that we had to learn by being on location, by developing shared language. And that was a challenge, but also a lot of fun.
Nice to hear. And do you think there were any unexpected risks that threatened the success of the pilots or the project?
Yes, what I didn't realize from the beginning is we were for business understanding, and we said, how do you create a business? But the main issue we learned is staying in business. So it's not creating a business, but staying in business. Big data technology are risky technologies. So you can have a data breach or that cause a lot of media attention. So that's a worry people have from the start, that and especially in this time where we didn't know exactly how the rules should be interpreted, we took the risk to take this project, and we had to explain it. So that's risky. So you have to be aware about the media. You have to be aware about the expectation of patients, of providers, to take that into account. And the other thing, and that's a general lesson, but it takes so long time to develop a big data technology, to clean all the data, to make the analytics, to get them together, that for professionals and patients, it takes too long. And they're out of interest before you can make the next step. So that was also staying in business, is keeping in contact with the patients and the providers. We're working on that, it takes time. And so then I think the main lessons is, it's not about understanding business, it's staying in business, and that means a lot of conversations with a lot of stakeholders.
It's even more difficult in COVID times because you miss these conversations, at least in person, so you need to switch to an online platform.
It's very difficult, so I feel sad because last time we had this event, we were in Valencia, we were joining, and now we are behind the screen. So yes, that makes it a challenge, and but on the other hand, we learned so much, and if we want to scale up, we need to do this online. So the lessons we learned are really relevant to us, but you agree. So it's important to meet each other. So I'm happy we are here as a team in Eindhoven, because it makes it different.
Yeah. In fact, we lost Valencia, one of the most wonderful cities in the world.
Yes,
what I can say.
Yes.
In any case, at the beginning of the project, you conducted a survey regarding feelings, sensations, main questions from researchers, stakeholders on GDPR implementation in their own countries. I'm really interested in that, of course. I'm the DPO of the project, and in that sense, for me, it's really relevant to understand what are your conclusions regarding the way that GDPR affected the development of our pilots. Because now you have two perspectives. The starting point, we are dealing in the first moment of the GDPR, and the final step, we applied GDPR.
So we must imagine that we were there at the moment that the GDPR was implemented. And of course, this law was in written, and people knew it was coming, but not on all levels of this project. You said we're working with patients, with providers, with hospitals, and they had to make that step. So what I said staying in business is the most important thing. So it was risky for them to work with the GDPR. So what the first thing it did is people were afraid to take a step. So that's, people had to invest in it, had to learn in it, and so we were there at the moment they did. So it was a beautiful moment to do research on it. And the lessons we learned was that in every country, how this law is understood is made by what is relevant in that country, how we perceive data, how we perceive technology, how we perceive the role of the state. So what we learned is there are many interpretations of the different rules that makes it, that people had to understand how do I understand this rule? So it took time. The other thing, and that was something that's sometimes missed in the discussion, is the GDPR is one rule. But about data, there are many rules in the hospitals, in the policy about, for example, confidentiality, products, safety. So there are so many different rules, and people had, it was not an empty space where a new rule came in. There were many different rules. So there was a lot of alignment needed but between these different rules. So again, a lot of conversations, and therefore people were hesitant to start in. And what he said before, we were talking about teams, and the teams were not available. So this poor project leaders went from one expert to the other to find it out. So that they did the work, and that was a lot of work. But may I ask a question to you then? Because I'm the social scientist and you're a legal expert. So can you ask, so knowing that it was that we had to organize a workflow, knowing, and we did that all the work. So what is the main lessons that we need to have a kind of workflow to ensure compliance in the projects we did?
I think that the main guidance to develop a workflow in GDPR compliance, it's GDPR itself. Because you have a really defined of processing that starts identifying the legitimate interest for processing data. That's first step. But we are in a cross-border processing project, in a transnational, in a trans-European processing research. And in that case, our first step was to train all the team. We need to deal with compromise, sensitivity, knowledge about GDPR concerns. First step. Second, Roland, you said it, 35 entities. We need to define clearly the roles played by each one. Are you a controller? Are you a processor? Is there a joint controllership? If we are managing anonymizing data, do we need another new profile as data consumer or data provider? It's really difficult to understand and to know who is who in our project. But after this, we have to deal with national laws. If you have a project located in only one country, okay, usual process. First of all, legitimate origin of data. Second, data protection impact assessment, where you learn about problems, risks, and so on. You deploy your risk remedies, and after this, you implement the follow-up of fulfilling GDPR. It's so easy. But if you look at France, Germany, Netherlands, Spain, main situations, different rules.
And how can we overcome? Because Europe, we want to have one Europe.
Now, this is not true. This is not true. Because GDPR differs to each national country law, the regulation of that. In that sense, if you look at France, it's more or less so easy to develop retrospective studies because you have exemptions, but no for prospective studies, when you need explicit consent.
Before we go into the details, should I then better do one project in France and not do it in Germany? Just keep within the borders? Or do you have me any advice where I can do that project, where I can bring the learning from Germany?
I think we could talk about that deeply after this part of our conversation. But at the end of the day, you need to deploy so many models as country you are dealing with.
Okay.
And this is really difficult, for sure.
But is anonymization possible?
Yeah. Wow. Let me say that to implement different models of fulfilling, we identify 3 ways to approach to processing of data. The first way was to process in local premises under national law. You have to think in a pilot in a national location with only applying the national law and GDPR between partners. This is so easy. Second possibility, we have to include the idea of federate processing. In this federate processing, you will process data in local premises, but you only could share inferences, lesson learned, information, but not personal data. If we do that, you have a problem. Third step. Okay, we can't do anything like first or second solution. Then we have to deal with anonymization. And this is an interesting and amazing lesson. If you look at recital 26 of GDPR, it says, to anonymize data, you have to implement a risk analysis regarding re-identification in case of inference, linking, or singling out. If anybody in the world, in Massachusetts, could, with a reasonable effort, re-identify data, you're in a hurry. But let me continue. Because if you read at the European Data Protection Board, in fact, Working Party Article 29, guidelines, and national guidelines, then anonymizing must be irreversible. Let me underline, reasonable effort, irreversibility. I think this is not the same. What we have implemented, for example, in Valencia, 4 steps to work. First step, we received a data set anonymized at source. But we are not confident with that. We implement a risk analysis to be sure about the conditions of that anonymization. And we developed a second layer of anonymization. Second, we are anonymizing twice. But we are not absolutely satisfied. And we implement a script to identify another risks of anonymization. Second. But there is a third step. Why not to develop a platform with security, measures, traceability, and all of the guarantees that we will apply in any case to personal data? And we've done it. But I think Supriyo was not satisfied. He wants more and more and more.
Always pushing.
And, yeah, always pushing. And we add a 4th layer of guarantees. This is the legal step. We develop data sharing agreements with non-re-identification commitments. And let me say, to be honest, I'm not sure if from the DPA's perspective, this is an anonymization, but I expect yes.
Yeah, indeed. And yeah, I mean, I think we went down a long journey, right, in the to making sure that things were properly de-identified, because I think one of the nice things that came out of this collaboration, and also thanks to GDPR, we were able to collaborate with equal responsibility, right? So you're working as joint controllers, and that way both parties feel responsible, and so the trust is also there, especially when you're having collaboration within private and public entities. But speaking of these terms, like, you know, you mentioned GDPR recital 26, and we're talking about who's the controller, who's the processor. I remember when we started the project 3.5 years ago, and we had, in those days, of course, we didn't have COVID, and everybody was, you know, the entire consortium came down. I think we had more than 100 people in that meeting. And we had this variety of people who were there, right? Like yourselves, you know, we are all from different backgrounds. And Of course, usually in these much smaller projects, you have a data scientist, and the data scientist only talks about cross-validation or AUC curves and things like that related to machine learning. And here we have Ricard then talking about GDPR, and you had this strange look on people's faces, what is this about? I've never heard of these terms. But the thing is that if you want to make these things work, you need this kind of communication across these silos that we currently have. But we have gone through that. But if you want to scale this now if other people now want to follow our example and they want to scale this, what advice would you have to have data scientists and legal people like yourself, how would they actually make it work? Because it is so complex. We didn't really understand each other at the beginning, I think.
Yeah.
Right?
I remember that I felt myself a strange one person in the meetings, or the bad guy.
Yeah, exactly.
The most
it's that guy again.
The most hateful colleague of the team. Let me say that, and let me repeat the guidelines of the Norway Data Protection Agency. They developed a guidance about how to develop software applying the data protection by design concept or principle. And they recommend as the first step, training the team. The reason is about communication. All of the team must understand what GDPR means, but in my thought, the most important question of that regards to promote compromise, sensitivity, and culture of data protection. It does mean that Roland, you don't need to know nothing about GDPR in terms of Article 1, 2, 3, or 5. And for this point of view, to be honest, the problem are the data protection officer, are the legal support. I'm really, I have to be honest with that. Why is the reason? Because the communication is a bilateral activity. We have to understand scientific terms, technological terms, and we have to develop the capability to discuss, to dialogue with the other parts of the team, with technicians, with data scientists, with physicians. This is our duty. We are not here to say you what GDPR states. I think you learned to read a long time ago. Then you can read it by yourself. Our main problem is to understand the purposes of the research to provide adequate solutions. This is our duty.
May I bring in something to protect your colleagues? Because what I think, you're right, it's about communication, but what is making it so difficult is that people bring in values. Values about privacy, values about protection, and that's what we saw happening in the teams, also about values about causality, values about good data. And the teams that started to discuss values had the most difficulty one. When they start, this is good or this is not good, then they started to make the difference larger. So what you said about compromising, that was important, and all you exchanged not only the rules, but also what matters to you most. And I think that was important. And when people start to say, like we now do often, but it was a hard step, I don't understand you, please can you explain it another time to me? And if you mean data, I mean information. So can we find a word where we can share?
Yeah, for sure.
That was the work we needed to do. So it's not,
we all have to look at ourselves. Let me remember, a long time ago in a meeting that I designed to interact with scientists and data protection officers, we developed a way to explain that from researchers to data protection officers. The first ask of a data protection officer at the end of the day was, but scientists usually infringe law. And this is so stupid. We have to deal with the problems together. It means that from the starting point of the definition of the research, we could help to implement adequate solutions in this dialogue, in this communication. But this is not an unilateral duty. This not regards only scientists, regards all of the team. Because if you are telling me about a retrospective study and I don't understand anything, probably we have a problem.
Yeah, I can imagine. And, you know, speaking of problems, of course, we faced many of them over the course of the whole project, but based on your experiences, what do you think is the future of healthcare, data-driven healthcare research in the EU and beyond in the future?
Yeah, to be short, we have a problem of common European rules. And we have a problem regarding international data transfers with a Scrum 2 judgment and the problem between European and United States relationships. For our competitiveness in artificial intelligence, for our strong collaboration between European countries and United States and so on, in this kind of research, for the common good of patients, we need to solve this problem. We need to develop common strategies and homogeneous legal framework to solve this kind of problems. Because a lot of basis of the reluctance we feel and we deal with the reluctance of different European entities to share data. Mm-hmm. And they usually talks about GDPR problems. Yeah. We have to solve that. Roland, please.
I mean, okay, I represent kind of the data scientist stakeholder here in the round. So, I mean, I just want to work with the data. I don't want to think of GDPR, to be honest. But, I mean, it is an important aspect also for me. But what did GDPR bring to the public and why is it actually relevant?
Yeah, let me finish with his question, because we are three opportunities just right now. Data Governance Act, that promotes and intermediate spaces to process data for research, AI regulation, where we have to take decisions on that, and third, we are talking about European health space, data space. Please, European regulators, if you are looking at me, take appropriate decisions. Give us a common legal framework. And considering your question, the purposes of GDPR is really simple. We are applying GDPR to protect persons. Then, if we apply GDPR in a correct way, we will provide certainty, security, and quality of data. Then, to be short, or in short, if we apply these rules, we are sure about the quality of data. In my experience, I think yours is the same. Sometimes when you are processing quality data with quality, sometimes you're wrong. But if you are processing bad data, for sure, you will be wrong. That's one of the main approaches. Second, patients are vulnerable persons. They have privacy, they have reputation, they have their own image, and they are worried about their own process. They need reliability. They need to be trusted on us. When we apply GDPR, we are providing certainty for patients. And let me say only additional questions regarding companies, public entities, and hospitals. What about reputation? Probably you are worried with the large amount of fines. Remember, UK, 500 millions, Luxembourg, 200 millions, and so on, and so on, and so on. But the most important value for European healthcare research is reputation. And GDPR provides you reputation.
Let's talk about data. We are, because we had business understanding, we have regulations, and we have the data. And you invested so much in the data and the data processing. So what are the main lessons about data processing and data modeling from this beautiful pilot?
Yeah, so as I mentioned earlier, we collected in collaboration with many different people a lot of general learnings, and we try to map them to different topics. Data is one important topic here, others like technology or validation and so on. So one of the key challenges is data access across countries, but also, if you're not an insider in the hospital or connected directly to the data provider, it's always difficult to access the data in the first place. So these are clear challenges. But then working with the data quality plays a very important role. Is the data suitable to solve my problem? I mean, in any way you need to process the data, clean up the data. Limited data is a very, very critical thing in most cases. Data is...
So if you have this project, what percentage of time do you spend on data processing and what on modeling? How is that?
So let's see, the project was about 3.5 years. I did spend a lot of time on accessing the data in the first place and then model the data. One key, at least one important learning is comparability, which also plays a big role. So I spent a lot of time, or many people spend a lot of time on accessing the data, processing the data, but an interesting learning is probably the comparability, as data sets are locked in the hospital or somewhere, and you can access the data, you can train your models, but then you get a result, but you don't know what it means. I mean, what does a score of 30, of 80, 90 at the end of the day means? So you need some comparability. Normally this can be done if you have a publicly available data set, other people train their models, and then you can see, okay, these guys got 80, you got 82, whatever. But if you train your model on a kind of very particular data set, never ever try to solve the same task or just similar tasks. So you're locked up in your dark room program and you don't know what it means, and this is a big problem, and we spend a lot of time in this. So I was programming, and also many colleagues did this. So you need to go to this next step. So another learning is how to set up actually a study in order to find out whether your results are valuable. So,
but Roland, speaking about setting these targets, right? I think there's a difference between the way you do normal data science projects and where you're not really connected to a clinician because you're just talking about accuracy, and you say, I've done this and I've done that, and you're benchmarking things from a technology point of view. But then, of course, the important thing is from a clinician's point of view, does that actually help me or not, right? And I think that was also very interesting, right, to see what does it actually mean for clinicians when you reach a particular
as a
target.
data scientist, if you do machine learning, you focus on the numbers. You want to publish maybe your results. If the other paper working on the same data has 80, you have 85, whatever score, then it's good. But what does it mean for the patient? What does it mean for the doctor? Can you actually make an impact? And this is what you actually need to find out. In the ideal case, I suggest to explore this and try to make a study in order to see whether your technology will not only boost scores, it's about, can you actually make a difference? Can you help clinicians? Can you help patients? And this is the important question, but this is very, very time consuming. So from computer science perspective, if you have the model, you can train it. It's a matter of a couple of days, maybe, if you're lucky. But running a study like this is really, really time consuming. So you need to take this into account.
I'm not a data scientist. Can you give me an example of a comparison you want to make, and you, just from your project, where you say, I have this data, but I don't know where it's relevant for physicians. Can you give me an example to bring it to life, that you had this data, you had this score, and you went to the clinicians and then make that relevant?
I mean, I can give an example from the pilot I was working on. So I was sitting there, got results, but this is the score, and the clinical partners, that looks good. I mean, but it's just a score. I mean, if you say, okay, I've got a ROC score above 80, great, but what does it mean? I mean, can we now treat patients in a better way? And in order to find this out, this is a very time-consuming. I mean, you need to plan this study. You need to get the approval by the ethical board and these things, and you need to run these experiments with real clinicians, and this is very time consuming. So is this the example you wanted to?
And I think sometimes it's also, this is really on the frontier, right? So you need to also see how far you can go, and that's not always clear because you're getting new insights from the data as well, which they may not be used to because they haven't even seen these things previously. So I was just wondering in terms of the blueprint, we have defined the blueprint so that others can actually make use of it. And in your opinion, how should people actually use this? How would it make a difference to them?
So as we all know, technology can develop quite fast. And so if I recommend to use this library, this software framework, this might be outdated in a couple of years. So what we try to do is we make suggestions, give recommendations, and try to provide a guidance in order to set up such projects. So my recommendation is try to find out what you would like to do. Try to find similar projects in our blueprint in order to see what did they do. Try to read here, and then have a look for the technologies. Have a look for the learnings, particularly. Maybe take all. Probably if you start doing this, you are hospital decision maker or decision maker in general. Try to get more people together. Have a look for our data processing cycle, which is super relevant here, and have a look for our learnings and the challenges. I mean, these are very general learnings, but they certainly will help you speed up certain steps because we made bad experiences and sometimes, and we realize, oh, this takes much longer. And if you know this, at least you can plan this in a maybe different way, and it will help you being aware of certain things. So and then you can have a look for the different technologies learnings from the stakeholders. So I mean, this is the way how to do it, and there's no use, I don't know, the Linux or the Windows system, or use library, TensorFlow, or whatever. But it's more about the general stuff. So we provide the guidance. Have a look on the webpage. Start from identifying the key projects, read through them, and then go slowly up. Analyze horizontal, and then the general learnings.
Yeah.
Wow. And let me say, I'm the legal one, and I said we have to understood what you are doing. And then in terms of learning, I know concepts as deep learning, machine learning, and so on. Could we say a bit more about the learning, please? About for whom are they defined?
So there are different levels of learning. So as I mentioned at the beginning, there the key challenges and learnings of each single pilot. And these probably depend on the person who wrote them, but many of them are technical, but also related to legal aspects, probably data access and so on. But then, I mean, we all sat together and try to provide general learnings out of the projects. And they should be for a larger number of different stakeholders. So many business learnings apply to probably most stakeholders. So the technical ones, many apply to the data scientists, but they apply they are kind of split to hospital decision makers, to also to health insurance. It depends.
And then in your view, we are working a lot to provide decisional models in future which should trust on our, not on the conclusions of BigMedilytics project, of course, but in the future of the technology. Because at the other side, patients are really expectant regarding AI technologies, models of prediction. We are thinking on this future.
I mean, technically, we've got of course, the stakeholder patient in our Blueprint website, and you can see all relevant learnings which are relevant for the patient, and you can see what might be of interest here. And also kind of providing a key overview about the short description of the different technologies which might be relevant for the patients.
Well, and we've spoken a lot about the technical learnings and learnings about from different perspectives. Any personal learnings, any personal takeaways from what you've done? Because it was quite a complex affair.
I mean, okay, I'm talking to you. You are managing the project, but so probably
the learnings were for you,
yeah.
right?
No, it is tricky to I mean, all the partners are great, of course, but it is sometimes tricky to chase the partners to get the right and relevant input of everybody. So, the learnings, as you know, this is nothing we can just come up. I mean, we can sit there and write something, but it's not really. So we need to talk to the people, we need to talk to the partners, and we need to make sure that we get the right input. And this is tricky, considering that the consortium was so large. You need to have a lot of phone calls, you need to send out a lot of documents, you have a lot of workshops and interactions and sessions together. So this work, and I don't have a standard solution. Sometimes one method works better than the other, but trying to get really the inputs. And sometimes actually you're talking to a person which is maybe more on the managing level, but the technical person you're not talking to knows actually much more about the details. This is the tricky part.
Well, I think that was a very interesting discussion. So thank you all for that.
Let me say only one thing.
Sure.
I'm looking at you. In Sign Pilots, you provide mobile apps to follow up the patients. In other, you could understand how to organize a hospital to be efficient in cases of very, very, very relevant diseases. In other projects, you provide predictive models in comorbidities. What you are doing, guys, is absolutely amazing. And I'm really happy to be here. For me, it's not important to be the most hateful people or person in the team with GDPR, but you have to be really conscious. You are changing world, and you are changing the world for patients. And that, for me, is the more relevance, equivalence in the project.
Absolutely. And on that touching point, well, I'd like to conclude that, it was a very interesting discussion, of course, especially because, it's been quite a long journey with several expected and unexpected twists and turns. We had the introduction of GDPR right at the start of the project, and we all thought, we knew it was coming along. We thought we were well prepared, but it's only when you get into the nitty-gritty details that you realize what you're really up against. And that's when we really started breaking new grounds and generating many of the learnings that you'll find in the blueprint that we have created. But also, just as you just heard, the beauty of the blueprint is not that it's just a monolithic, static framework. Healthcare systems are complex systems, and everyone has their own requirements. And you simply can't impose your own way of working. Instead, if you want to scale, you need to be able to adapt to the fragmented requirements of individual patients and care providers. And this applies to the technical, business, policy, and legal aspects. So the key message is that you simply can't use a one-size-fits-all approach. Well, we hope that you're able to use the blueprint to chart your own course depending on your own requirement. And this, we believe, will help all stakeholders in the healthcare sector across Europe accelerate their digital transformation journey. So thank you very much for listening to this discussion, and thank you for your viewpoints.
Thank you all. That was amazing. And also, can I say, on behalf of the world, congratulations to you and the entire hundreds of people working on this program that we're finally here to launch it. And of course, the rest of the event is about scaling it, deploying it, and improving people's lives.